Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our racial trauma panel. To those of you who might have logged on already, we're going to take the next 3 minutes or so to allow people to join, and then we'll get started. Good evening, everyone. In the interest of time, I think we should get started. I know there's a lot of people who are likely still signing on, but we'll have just a few remarks to start us off today, and hopefully that can be a period while people sign on. So again, welcome to Racial Trauma Within Black Communities, a panel discussion among Black mental health clinicians. My name is Dr. Kimberly Ashby, and I'll be your host and moderator for this evening's panel. Before I introduce the panel, our exceptional panelists, I'd like to tell you all a little bit about the Black Paradise Project. And the Black Paradise Project is the collaboration through which this panel has been created and is possible. So the Black Paradise Project is a collaborative concept developed by myself, who, I'm a Black psychologist, and Yannick Lowry, who is a Black multimedia visual artist. The aim of the project is essentially to mitigate the mental health consequences of exposure to racism by providing Black people with opportunities to share their experiences and to engage in joy and Black joy. So since September, we have been partnering with Black-owned businesses, organizations, and individuals to host a number of joy-based events meant to provide people of color with outlets to cope with and heal from racial trauma through self-care. So some of these events have included a yoga class that we just had last weekend. We've also had ice skating, roller skating. We had a meditation sitting. We had a dance class. We had a hike with outdoor Afro, and we had a tea and tinctures workshop that taught us about herbs used in the African diaspora. So we've done a lot of great things. It's been really fun. All of the events are open to people of color and completely free. They happen in Philadelphia for those of you who might be outside of the area. But some of them might be virtual, so please take a look out for that. But yeah, these events have been really great. And in addition to these events, upon the conclusion of our joy-based events, imagery and survey responses from these experiences will be used to develop a mural in Philadelphia that will communicate the power of Black joy in the face of racial oppression. So that's a little bit about us. If you're interested in hearing more about the Black Paradise Project, please check out our website. It's at www.blackparadise.com. I'll put it in the chat right now. And on our website, you can check out our full list of joy-based events. You can also, there we go. You can also take the survey that we've developed, which really just invites people of color to share their experiences with racism and the mental health consequences that they've experienced after encountering racism. So yeah, if you care to, we'd love for you to take the survey so that we can use that data to inform the creation of our mural. And if you would prefer to share that information over the phone rather than online, you can also call our hotline at 1-833 for the POC. And I think we're going to throw that into the chat too, so that y'all can have that ready and ready to access. Oh, there goes the survey. Thank you so much, everyone. And it looks like Nadia is putting the number in. Thank you. And then finally, I'd like to take a moment just to thank our funders. They include the Mural Arts Program of Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services, and the Van Amergen Foundation. Thank you so much for making this possible. So now, before I introduce our panelists for this evening, we thought that it would be beneficial to begin the event with a brief guided meditation. Racial trauma can be a difficult topic, and thus taking a moment for mindfulness might really allow all of us, panelists and attendees, to really just ground ourselves so that we can readily engage in tonight's conversation. So with that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Shoshana A. Bray, one of our panelists, who will lead us in this brief guided meditation.
Peace, everyone. Good evening. If you're not familiar with grounding, this is an opportunity for us to come back into our bodies in this moment so we can better connect with ourselves, so we can better give ourselves what we need. And so we ground so that we can feel and so that we know, hey, do I need to take a little bit of a time for myself? Do I need to take a break? And so that's what we'll do the next few moments. Everything I'm offering is an invitation. Take what you want, take what feels good for you, take what feels safe for you, and leave behind anything else that doesn't. And so my first invitation is just to bring your body into awareness. Notice the room that you're in, perhaps even notice the chair that you're sitting in. Notice what that feels like. Notice where you're supported and where you're supporting your own body's weight. Perhaps you'd like to bring your awareness to your feet, noticing where your feet make contact with the floor. Perhaps you'd like to even close your eyes or lower your gaze so that you can really turn your awareness inward towards your body. And as you notice your body here, noticing your natural pace of breathing, noticing where you're making connection, I invite you to begin to notice your breath. Notice how you inhale and exhale. And I invite you to use your inhales as an invitation to invite into this moment what it is you need to be a part of this conversation. Perhaps you need to invite in some ease. Perhaps you need to invite in peace. Perhaps you need to invite in safety. Perhaps you like to invite your ancestors. Perhaps you like to invite your guides. Perhaps you'd like to invite some joy, bravery. You know yourself. What is it that you'd like to invite? And for my fellow panelists, I invite you to also consider that. What do you need to invite into this space to feel as present as possible? What will allow you to be here? In a moment, I'm going to invite you to literally, if there are things you have to get up and get, to do that. Use your inhales as invitation. It's important that we find moments of safety and practice safety. While we may be talking about racial trauma as a concept, it doesn't exempt us from the impact of that. And so my last invitation is to come back to this space. This feels good for you as we move through our conversation. If you notice yourself getting more distant from your body, if you notice yourself closing in, becoming more uncomfortable, feeling more unsafe, I invite you to take care of yourself. Turning off your camera, taking a break, stretching, getting a glass of water, putting on something that helps you feel safer or grounded. And to close our grounding, I like to close with 3 collective breaths to seal this space. So breathing in and filling up. Exhale, let something go. Beautiful. Twice more, just like that. Breathing in and fill up. Exhale, let something go. And once more, perhaps taking the deepest breath you've taken all day. Breathe in and fill up. Retain your breath and notice it, and sigh it out. Mm. Thank you all. And if you need to go do something to invite it into this space to be present, I'd encourage you to do that now. Thank you, Kim.
Shashina, we are so grateful for you. You created such a moment there, and I knew you would create a moment. So thank you. That was wonderful. And I think what we all needed. So thank you so much. So now let's jump into the meat of this evening. I would really just like to start off by making sure that everyone is familiar with what we're talking about tonight. So before I introduce each panelist, I just wanted to go over the definition of racial trauma for people who might not be familiar with that concept or that term. Racial trauma is a term used to describe the physical and psychological symptoms that people of color often experience after exposure to stressful experiences of racism. So this evening, our panelists will discuss the individual and collective impact that racism has on Black mental and physical health, as well as means by which Black people can heal. So let me introduce our amazing panelists. To start off with, we have Sam L. Rucker. Sam L. Rucker is an Afro-Indigenous, queer, non-binary parent and psychotherapist who utilizes trauma-informed relational style therapy through an intersectional feminist lens and Afro-Indigenous spiritual practices to facilitate the healing process. Sam received a master's degree from LaSalle University in professional clinical counseling with a concentration in marriage and family therapy, and specializes in eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or EMDR. The crux of Sam's work rests on identifying and reconnecting to the self, healing internal dissonance, to the self, which heals internal dissonance. Sam refers to this work as reestablishing personal and generational roots to mend the fractured soul. In private practice, Sam works with individuals of color and transracial adoptive families. Sam works with the Therapy Center of Philadelphia, or TCP, as a psychotherapist, intern field supervisor, clinical supervisor, group supervisor for clinicians of color, and change team member, assessing the organization's commitment to the mission of racial and gender equity. At Walnut Psychotherapy Center, WPC, Sam facilitates the People of Color Supervisory Group, guiding clinicians/healers towards deepening and defining their practices. Additionally, Sam facilitates a virtual bi-weekly community support group for BIPOC folks who are feminine of center. Thank you so much, Sam, for being here. Next, we have Shashina A. Bray, who just led us in that wonderful meditation. Shashina is a mother, therapist, advocate, and educator. She is a Boston native who has taken up roots in Philadelphia. Shashina came to Philadelphia to attend Temple University and fell in love with the rich culture of the city. In service to her new home, Shashina decided over the decade to deepen her understanding of her community's needs as an educator and a social justice grassroots advocate. In 2014, Shashina realized her service to the Black and Brown communities was best actualized through her passion, mental, and emotional wellness. Honing her focus and training, Shashina earned her MSED in mental health counseling from the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education in 2016. In 2017, Shashina launched Going Inward Wellness, LLC. Through Going Inward Wellness, LLC, Shashina sees individuals and couples for psychotherapy, teaches yoga, hosts wellness workshops for global majority women, teaches mindfulness to youth and adults, and offers professional wellness development to businesses and organizations. Notable assignments and partnerships include the People's Emergency Center, Black Star Film Festival, the North Philadelphia Community Healing Project, Village of Arts and Humanity, Girl Trek, the Institute of Contemporary Art, in Philadelphia specifically, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and Uncle Bobby's Coffee and Books. Shashina currently serves as a lead clinician in the Life After Trauma organization and a mindfulness teacher for What is Mindfulness. More recently, Shashina has taken her organizational development skills and her clinical skills to support survivors of sexual violence as the director of programs for Me Too International. You can join Shashina in the community at her bi-weekly virtual meditation space, the 720 meditation. And I'm sure we will hear more about that because that sounds like a great resource. So thank you for being here, Shashina. Next, we have Dr. Eva Wilson. Dr. Eva S. Wilson is a multiracial Black cis woman and counseling psychologist based in Philadelphia. She received her MA and PhD in counseling psychology from Boston College and her BA in psychology from Yale University. Eva's clinical interests include working with adolescents and adults with special interests in racial identity development, adult ADHD, and supporting students of color at PWIs, or predominantly white institutions. Currently, Eva is a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Pennsylvania Counseling and Psychological Services, where she provides culturally responsive, social justice-oriented individual and group therapy and outreach programming to undergraduate, graduate, and professional students and the broader campus community. Eva's outreach work has focused on supporting Black students experiencing racial trauma, coping with the COVID-19 pandemic, and crisis intervention trainings. Her research focuses on exploring racial identity development and well-being in multiracial individuals, intersections of marginalized identities in Black women and girls, and the influence of race and racism on political elections. Eva, it is a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for being here. And last, but certainly not least, we have Mr. Kevin Hubbard. Kevin Hubbard attended Temple University for his bachelor's degree in psychology, as well as his master's degree in counseling psychology. Kevin is a licensed professional counselor in both Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Kevin is a certified mindfulness-informed professional. Kevin is also trained in EMDR. Kevin has made it his career work to work in underserved communities of color, including those individuals with limited access to quality mental and behavioral health care. Kevin's philosophy of care is that therapy is a process that promotes change and healing. Kevin believes that no one issue is too great for an individual to overcome if they are willing to put forth the effort and energy it takes to confront issues head on. Kevin provides therapy, training, and supervision for other mental health professionals, mental health consulting, and conducts group mindfulness coaching. Kevin, it is a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for being here. So now we're going to start the panel. I'm going to pose some discussion questions. I just like to let everyone know, the audience specifically, that there will be a question and answer session at the end of today's panel. We're gonna probably get to that around 7:15 for those on the East Coast. So just keep that in mind. If you find that you have questions over the course of our conversation today, please make sure to save them, to maybe write them down even, just so that you'll have them ready during our Q&A session. So let's get started. So my first question for you all is, how has racial trauma manifested in your life? What are your personal experiences with racial trauma? How, if at all, have your social identities or positionality influenced these experiences? And anyone who would like to begin can kick us off.
Thanks, everyone. I'll go ahead and get us started. When I was thinking about this question, I immediately thought about like my roots, my organizing roots. And as someone who early on, 18, 19, even before that, even before I came to college, became really clear that I wanted to stand for us, right? As a people, I wanted to make sure, things were different for next generations. That in positioning myself as helper consistently, like in some ways you almost feel exempt, right? Because you're talking about it, you're doing the work to dismantle it, you're doing the work to disrupt it, that you almost just expect it. Like, yeah, of course that happened. Of course they gentrified that. Of course that person was murdered. You just normalized it. And so I normalized a lot as a community activist, doing, just because I was, working around police terrorism. And I was like, it's terrible, but in some ways, I never let it sink in that this was my reality too. I wasn't just working to dismantle this reality for others, like this is my reality too. And holding the pain of that, not just the concept of that, but really holding the pain of that. And I would say around 2015, 2016, it started to crack, right? When I went into my graduate program, I had to reflect in a way that I hadn't before. I had to come back, I had to make it about me in a way that I hadn't before. And I realized just how sensitive I was, and that how much I numbed in order to do the good work, how much I was numbing in order to get through, how much I was numbing in order to hold space for other people. And so when things started to erupt in 2015 and 2016, I realized I was tired. I couldn't move the way I used to move. I was also a parent now. My daughter was a little older. I couldn't move like a college student. And so I started to feel the weight of that. And I remember and that caused me to pull back from some of my organizing work and focus on my therapy work. I remember going to a film screening for Mumia Abu Jamal. Not a film screening, it was a fundraiser, and we were showing a series of films in honor of Mumia. And I couldn't take it. It was like footage from Black Lives Matter protests. It was footage from, it was too much. I was just kind of tearing up in the back, realizing that I could no longer hold this weight, that it was getting to me, that even as someone who's supposed to be holding space for others, that it was getting to me. And it just made me sad. It made me scared. It made me feel, I won't say weak, but it made me realize how vulnerable I was, that in all of my power, I still couldn't fix all these things, and that this was right at my doorstep as well. And so that's been my experience. And so it's been a gradual work of naming this pain and working on it, not trying to get over it, and creating boundaries so that I can be more realistic about what I can actually take, right? I can't handle it on, I can't shoulder it all, right? So this even prevents me from even watching certain movies. There are a lot of Black movies, especially historical movies, I just have not watched because I cannot go there. The conversations I don't engage with because I cannot go there.
Sheena, thank you. I just wanted to note how you just brought up the importance of noticing what's going on for yourself emotionally and within your body, and checking in with yourself to notice when those things are showing up. I really appreciate that. Anyone else want to share?
No, I do. I'm thinking a lot about what you shared, Shashina. And when I think about like the ways that it's manifested, yeah, it's caused a specific type of sensitivity. And so when I was looking at this question, I was like, I don't even want to think about this. I don't even want to talk about this, you know? And I'm like, how am I supposed to answer this question? Like, I don't know how to answer this question. And I had like this whole internal dialogue of avoidance. And then, you know, with my like, I do this, you know, and I think that they teach this in grad school, right? When they talk about self with the therapist, when they have you like go in and be like, why are you asking yourself these questions? And like, you really need to unpack this thing that's happening for you. And so I, of course, like, you know, they trained me well enough. I went through that process myself, you know, of like really trying to like deconstruct like where that level of avoidance was coming from within me. And I'm like, damn, like these conversations, we weren't allowed to have these conversations. And so my automatic response goes into like not wanting to have this conversation and being really resistant to it because like, even though no one's around, I'm going to be in trouble for thinking about it. And whether I'm in trouble, like in terms of like who I'm naming this to or speaking about this with, I'm also like opening up something within myself that will cause me to be wounded, to bleed, to feel the pain, right? And so a lot of like that numbness that you talked about, Shashina, that we have to walk through until then, like it breaks open. It's that breaking open point is overwhelming. And once it's broken open, for me, in terms of like being authentic, aligned, and like true to myself, I cannot close it back up. And so when I listen to you talk about boundaries, I think about the boundaries that I set for myself. I can't engage with the news. I can't even engage with social media because of the way that, how our pain is glamorized. There's a lot of media, movies that focus on our pain. And where's our joy? And so the ways that it has manifested for me is that I have really been looking at our joy, our satisfaction, looking at what abundance really means, what it means to lay down roots and what it means to have them firm in the ground in order to create stability for myself, for my child, for my community, for those that I care about more intimately and personally. And so that's what came up for me when I read this. So I do appreciate this question because it caused a lot of thought that I know is going to continue beyond just today, beyond the panel.
Yeah, Sam, thank you for acknowledging that. I imagine that a lot of people here right now might be feeling what you're talking about, right? Just being here, just having this topic being brought up. So thank you for voicing that. And again, doubling down on the importance of boundaries. So important. So thank you.
I'll just briefly add, because I echo so much and really resonate with what was said. For me, sometimes the cost of not enforcing those boundaries is I've gotten sick. Like I've come down with the flu, and it's after days of seeing just trauma reproduced and maybe glamorized on the news over and over. And I think especially with social media, how inundated we can be. It's not just the 5 o'clock news and then it's off. You can read about any incident all day, every day. And I've felt physically sick and like had to take days off And in some ways, I think that's my body forcing me to stop and forcing me to rest, because those boundaries are so important, and our bodies will talk to us when we ignore them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eva. I really appreciate you adding that. Kevin, anything you want to add? Totally okay if you don't want to.
Yes, absolutely. First of all, echoing everything that's been said thus far, I gotta say, I agree wholeheartedly with what Eva said about, just the physical reaction. And I can say for myself, and I'm just being, vulnerable here. When I think about what just happened in Philadelphia on 23rd Street, that massive fire that killed those children, and like then right after, like the one in New York in the Bronx, it's almost like, wow, when do we get a break? And I think the word Shashina used was tired, and I am exhausted, and the bombardment, whether it be, through just the news, the media, social media, for the average person who may not have like just those, therapeutic coping skills that we, try to teach every day. It's almost like, okay, so where do I go for this? Because this I can't necessarily like get away from readily. But at the same time, I think that, we're all privileged in that way. We know where to go, we know what to do, we kind of have our self-care regimens and routines, and we can, tap into that. But I'm just, humbled when I meet someone who is just like, I'm tired and I just want to just talk. And I think, spaces like this, and, spaces like what just occurred with Shashina, what she just created, we need that so much. We need it every day, almost. And I think that as we, travail these years with just seeing all this racial trauma unfold, and, 2020 and all that, I feel like it's moving towards something. I'm not quite sure what, but it just feels like, this racial reckoning has been a long time coming. And I hope that it, turns into positive action, positive legislation, just positive outcomes for our people. So, yeah.
Kevin, thank you for sharing that perspective, for being vulnerable. I know it's what we're supposed to do as therapists, but it's not easy to do, especially in front of many people. So thank you for that. I'm going to move on to our next question, which is definitely linked to what we've just been talking about, right? And it's going to kind of go further in depth in terms of what people have been experiencing as of late. So over recent years, Black people have been exposed to many images of Black death at the hands of police. Walter Wallace Jr., a Black man killed by police on 61st and Locust Street, provides a local example of this public form of Black death. And obviously, Kevin, what you just said about, that particular fire, definitely another example that's come up even more recently, right? So this is happening all the time. I'm wondering, panelists, could you all please provide some explanation of what is happening physically, biologically, emotionally, and or mentally to Black people when they see these images of Black death?
Well, I guess I could start that one off. I feel like what happens physically is kind of like, I feel like part of it is like just seeing it is a physical reaction, like just the exposure. I automatically think to, defense, like what do I need to do to protect myself? Like it's like I go into like this fight or flight mode when I see violence against Black bodies. Biologically, I'll say, just hormonally, I don't know about everyone here, but like when a police officer is driving behind me, um, I get a reaction. I have like a tension in my chest. I get a shot of cortisol for sure from my adrenal glands. I'm in high alert. I'm in that mode. Um, and of course, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not being violent. I'm not being aggressive. But it doesn't matter under what circumstance. I could be driving too slow or too fast. I don't know what it is, but it's certainly a biological thing that happens, and I start to feel anxious. I would say emotionally and mentally, I feel like when I see some of the things that I see, like what happened to Walter Wallace, I think we're just all still collectively grieving. And while I'm trying to live my everyday, day-to-day life, you know, anyone could easily be a Walter Wallace when there's, no communication, when there's no dialogue, when there's no de-escalation. I grew up a couple blocks over from where he got shot. I used to live in that neighborhood. Stuff used to happen all the time, but I mean, as far as the police, I mean, they weren't, I'll put it to you this way, they weren't kind, they weren't approachable. And I guess what I just hope to see is just, with the physical, biological, and mental, effects of this, is just to build awareness first, and understand how to engage with our bodies, understanding how we need to protect ourselves mentally, particularly mentally, because we all have that, we all know that that stigma of, oh, well, if I have a broken arm, I'll go to my doctor. But if I have, depression, I'll just ride it out. And we can't do that any longer. So, yeah.
Word. So well said. And I love how you use like a really personal example that I think probably resonates with everyone here. That's really helpful.
Something that I think about specifically is the constant images. We have constant access to witnessing. Like, it makes me think of like back in, like foreign slavery and things like that, when they used to have like public lynchings, right? And so witnessing folks get like murdered by police constantly, watching these fires, like watching different things happen, hearing that like one of our children is missing, or a lot of our children are missing, and things like that. It just is like this constant reminder, it feels like to me, for us to stay in a specific place. And now it's so widespread, and it's being continually like reinforced, and then it gets embedded, and then it gets ingrained. And it makes me think a lot about what has happened to our leaders. And our leaders, they get murdered, they get imprisoned, they're hunted like they're prey, you know what I mean? And it's like, it's now become, I feel like it went from this thing that like we know about, and maybe this, I'm speaking for myself, and maybe it might be a reflection upon my generation, but it's like this thing that we know about, it happened in the past. We know that it's happening. We like heard it a couple times. We maybe heard it through the grapevine, and then it brings it right face to face on our doorsteps in a way that is like, no matter who you are, no matter what you're doing, you could be speaking out, you could shut up, it's still going to happen anyway. And so it for me, it makes me think about and like presses upon mental imprisonment, fear mentality. And because of those things, I feel very protective of myself. I feel very protective of my child, to have access to a lot of these things, because for me, my focus is on freedom. And it's hard to focus on freedom when I'm constantly being reminded of how we are held back or continually like pushed back in very violent ways. And I'm like noticing that I'm choosing my language carefully, and I'm not saying what it really is that I want to say. And I'm like packaging it very nicely. And we all know that it's not nice like this.
Let us know. Come on now.
When I get a little bit more comfortable, we can go see, but I can't see everybody's faces up in here, so I'm gonna watch it.
Sam, I just wanted to say that like providing that example of like the public lynchings, I don't think I've heard anyone make that comparison, and it is so spot on, right? It is so spot on, because why is it that like these images are like sent around in such a sensationalized way, almost a glorified way, right? In the same way they used to be. Thanks for making that connection.
I also was thinking when Sam said that now though it's like under this guise of we're bringing awareness, it's important everyone knows because everyone denied that it happened and everyone said it was in the past. And so at first, and I'm seeing in the chat a little bit, I was the same way of like, I need to reshare, I want everyone that I know to be aware and to not be ignorant. But then it becomes, okay, I can share a new story every single day. And it does, as you said, Sam, like reinforce like that this keeps happening, that people are working so hard to try to stop this and to create change. And it's just such an avalanche of it continuing to happen. And so I do think it like has that impact, but it's like the gaslighting of, oh no, we're just making this movie about Black trauma because it's important for people to know the history. And it's like, but you're also creating images of Black trauma and putting it out there and making that the norm of what we see all the time. So I feel like the gaslighting part of it of like, okay, we want people to be informed, but also like how many times do you have to show that image? How many uncensored videos are you going to post and autoplay on social media so that everyone has to see it constantly, and for all of the Black people online to not have the choice to like opt out of seeing it all the time.
So well said, Eva. Thank you for just like, yeah, clarifying this even more. I feel like everything that people are saying is so spot on. I'm also just wanted to direct people to the chat. It seems like a lot of people are expressing that they are resonating with this in the chat. So make sure to check that out as well.
I want to name a few things that I've experienced and I've noticed in my work with my clients and just in general what I've noticed in terms of how our bodies have responded to racial trauma. And so first, I just want to name that living under white supremacy is traumatic in of itself, right? So that's our baseline, right? And so things that I've noticed, anger, depression because we're angry, heightened anxiety. And, when we talk about anxiety, people might often talk about hypervigilance, like constantly looking for danger. And I want to like take a moment to kind of break that down, like just how vigilant we're actually being. I like to geek out on the brain. So in our brain, in our ventral vagal system, don't need to know what that is, there's something that we do called neuroception. And so it's when our part of our mind is constantly scanning the environment being our bodies first, and then our external environment is constantly scanning for danger. Is this danger? Is this danger? Is this danger? Is this danger? And you think about our lived experiences, the environments we go to going into a grocery store, how someone's going to perceive you. If I put my full name on this housing application, am I going to be treated differently if I had used my middle name, right? All of those little moments, our body is already scanning for that. And the interesting thing about neuroception is our bodies are already responding to danger before our minds even realize it. So before we've even said, oh, that was racist, or we said, that's a problem, or you did this thing, our bodies are already like, oh, this is unsafe for me. And so we're constantly walking around feeling internally unsafe because our bodies are picking up on this constant danger that we're experiencing. And so in our efforts to mitigate that, we have coping mechanisms, we have ways of being that help us to feel safe, but sometimes these ways of being then isolate us from each other, which is exactly what we need in order to be well. And so, yeah, that's what's happening to us, right? Adding on top of that, the disconnect from our bodies, right? Our bodies are so intelligent, and we can't feel them. We don't know what's happening. We don't know where that thing is coming from. Some of us are like, I don't even want to go there. Like I can't even go there because it's too much. And so that's the impact of racial trauma, right? This is what's happening in our interpersonal dynamics. This is what's happening when we're just trying to make a basic decision. All of these things are happening even without our awareness that are indicating this is not okay. I don't feel good.
Thank you for bringing the neuroscience. I was wondering when we were going to get the neuroscience, and I really appreciate you incorporating it, because I think that people are getting more aware of racial trauma and maybe what some of the mental health symptoms look like, but I feel like people are not fully getting that this is like a biological thing, not just something that's behavioral, right? That like down to like, you know, the synapses, the connections in, you know, our neural networks like are being influenced by this. So thank you for reminding people of that. I'm going to move on to the next question, and it's about PTSD. So racial trauma and PTSD are similar in many ways. However, whereas many people suffering from PTSD can only heal after their exposure to trauma has ended, people experiencing racial trauma must deal with continuous exposure to racism. In light of the fact that Black people can't completely remove themselves from racism, the cause of their trauma, how can Black people heal in this context? It's a tall order, I know, but I'm curious what y'all think.
I guess I could try to start that one off. So I think one of the things I try to do when I'm working with a client is I try to, you know, explain to them what trauma is, like in layman's terms, because a lot of people say, oh, I have PTSD. Well, how do you know? You know, of course, there's diagnostic criteria, et cetera, but the way that I define trauma is it is when someone or something takes away your ability to feel safe. And it just full stop, right? And as a result, you're going to have these reactions, these manifestations, whether it be, you know, physical, whether it be in your thoughts. You know, so I try to make it simple when I'm trying to explain like trauma in that way. But then when we talk about racial trauma, it is a slightly different angle. And especially when you're having to deal with it on a fairly consistent basis. And I know we talked about like the news and social media, et cetera, but I wonder how it is for that person who has to go to work and every day they're treated as if they're a second hand. They're treated as if they don't have the same amount of value in the workplace. So I think that in order to deal with something like that, in order to work through something like that, it's got to be some level of understanding of like, is this a safe space for you? Is this a safe space for you? And I think in order to reconstitute our safety, we have to kind of like think about, okay, so what do I need? Like, do I need to take more breaks? Do I need to take a walk? Do I need to, you know, meditate? Do I need mindfulness? Do I need prayer? Do I need a therapist that I talk to every single week? And just dealing with those daily struggles, it can be like they're just on us all the time, and we're just trying to get it off of us. But there was a quote that I heard recently in an interview with, I believe his name was Dr. David Kessler, and he said, "What we avoid pursues us, and what we face transforms us." And that kind of, you know, makes it plain in terms of like, how do we need to deal with these problems that we're having, not just in our psyche, but on a societal level? Like, these things need to be faced. And when we don't face them, we have no chance of really addressing the core issue. So, yeah.
Thank you. I think that's enough said. Thank you. Any other thoughts from folks?
This question makes me think a lot about powerlessness. And I have a hard time with powerlessness, maybe because I've been there before and sometimes I revisit that space. And when I think about like with PTSD, it's really interesting to me. I don't like diagnosis at all. I especially don't like diagnosis for any, like for POC period, like at all. And because it, you know, has been used to harm us and pathologize us and tell us what's wrong with us. When what is wrong with us is the system that we're living within, right? When I think about how we can heal within that context, the reason why powerlessness comes up for me is because when I think about the ways that it has helped me and like folks that I work with to be able to heal, is that I'm not viewing things through the lens of powerlessness. I want to find your places of power. Where do you hold power? What do you feel you can control? Because a lot of the reinforcement is that we have no control over anything, that we can't do anything, we are nothing, we are subhuman. And when that is the message, that's going to be the story that we believe, but that doesn't make it true. So when we really break down that story and we start to reframe our experiences so that we know that we have power, then we have a different experience when we're walking into work at that really fucking horrible place that we work at, right? And we walk in that tension that exists in the space because it's a predominantly white space and everybody's looking at you. And when you speak up, as soon as you make a noise, somebody got something to say, they're looking at you or make you feel like you walk away feeling like crap. You know what I mean? Being able to know what is happening in that moment creates power. It helps one understand this is what's happening to me right now. And now that I know what's happening to me right now, I have a choice that I can make. In a society where our choices are continuously taken from us and we are lied to and told that we have no choice, I'm telling you, we got all the choice, all of it. And so when I think about us healing, a part of the healing process is finding our power and really knowing and understanding on a visceral, physical level that we do have choice, that we have value, and that we matter.
Wow. Okay. So yes, finding your power. Those of you taking notes, I feel like that needs to go down there. That is essential. Eva, Shoshana, I'm wondering if you all have want to comment on this, but I also kind of wanted to throw one other element into the mix. Any responses before I do so? Wanted to think about intergenerational trauma on top of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for saying that, Sam. And I think one of the ways we build that power is by being in community with each other, right? We need more community ritual. We can't escape the madness, so we have to create fortified spaces within the madness. And we do that by being in community with each other. This is not, and I'm gonna say it this way so it can drop down, this is not some go it alone shit. This is not something you can do by yourself, right? We need collective spaces. I am the product of collective spaces. And so, yeah, community ritual is a way that we can respond to our healing even while we are in this madness. And then the other thing I'll add, choosing joy and healing as forms of resistance, right? Choosing to do those things are ways of resisting, slowing down. And I just want to say, really embodying this idea that we're all we got. I know we love that term, but I really want to challenge us to embody that and therefore give space for other Black people to show up in their Blackness that may be different from your Blackness, because you understand we are truly all we got. It is imperative that we give each other space to show up in our Blackness, whatever that looks like, because we need each other. And so I think that's a part of how we heal, or how we heal even as we have to continue to be in this.
So more notes of wisdom. We need community. We need to do this collectively. Thank you. I was going to throw in the intergenerational trauma piece, Eva, but did you want to respond before I do so?
I mean, first of all, yes to everything that's been said. I was nodding a lot. Yeah, I think just in addition to that community piece, or like a part of it, I think that I've noticed, like, especially in working with clients and just talking to friends and like my people that help ground me when dealing with these kinds of things. I think part of why those community spaces are so important is that it exposes you to other people who like have the same reality as you do. Because when you're going into that like mostly white office, and if you make a noise, it's blown up, like that reality and like your lived reality are separate things. And that's part of why you're reacted to in that way. And that's part of why it feels so bad being there. And I think that that's something that I think I try to provide also like within therapy or within especially group spaces therapeutically, is it's a place where group members can validate each other, where the therapist can just help provide a space where like that person's reality is acknowledged and is held to be true in that space, because we walk around all the time in spaces where it's not acknowledged, it's not recognized as valid. And like on the highest levels too, like thinking about policy, thinking about like politicians and the way they talk about stuff, they're not talking about our reality.
Yeah, Eva, I had so many thoughts based on what you just said. You know, I was reflecting on the fact that Eva and I both come from a similar white, predominantly white, I would say white supremacist institution of Boston College. And you know, even within BC, I feel like part of the way we both survived was like through our research team of other Black folks. You know what I mean? Like it's demonstrated. So thank you. So let's consider intergenerational trauma. So considering that Black people have inherited intergenerational trauma, a term for the cumulative emotional effects and psychological wounding that is transmitted across generations, what are your thoughts on Black people's mental and emotional healing? How do you conceptualize healing for Black people in light of the fact that they have trauma they face in the world and trauma that they inherit through their genes?
I think about just like trauma is written in our genes, joy and love and happiness and all those beautiful things are written in our genes as well, right? I'm thinking about like specifically, I think I'm also thinking of like the overlap of neuroplasticity as well, of like when we interrupt, when we interrupt the difficult thoughts that we're having, when we lean into community in a very particular way, when we fight that urge to isolate, to move away to like, because we've been very well versed in like going inward and like not allowing folks to see our pain because our pain is not valid. That when we interrupt those interactions, then we get to rewrite what has happened in our DNA already. And we get to lean into the loving interactions and the tenderness, the tender experiences that we can have with one another. And as we've been talking about this, I've been thinking a lot about what it means not to other one another. So like Shashina, when you mentioned about being in community with one another and like really being open and not necessarily like there's not one way of being Black. Like I'm thinking about a lot of the ways that we've been taught to other us is very white dominant. And when we start to really deconstruct and really look at the way that white dominance moves through us internally and the way that we interact with one another, then we're able to heal a lot of the intergenerational things that have been written in our DNA, in addition to a lot of the the generational curses, what we call them, that move continuously, because then we find that we're not doing the experience of being in this body wrong, that we are actually just trying to make it and doing our best just like everybody else is. And so then we're able to we have the ability more to lean into one another. And so like when I think about this, I think about like that, I think about my ancestors, I think about roots, I think about y'all's ancestors, and I think about the ways in which like we can exist in this way that allows us to really hold each other.
Yes. Really quickly, you mentioned neuroplasticity, and I know your whole answer is kind of related to that, but for folks who might not know what that term means, what do you mean by neuroplasticity?
Neuroplasticity is the ability to like train our brain to bounce back. So that when we're having those experiences of depression or the anxiety or the nerves is what they called them when I was growing up, learned about anxiety when I was like, I don't know, maybe in my 20s or something. It was the nerves before, but like when we have those experiences, there's a way that we can retrain our brains in order to bounce back from those experiences more quickly so that we don't get run down and stuck in the mud, essentially.
Well said. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I want to say that in terms of the intergenerational trauma, I think that for Black folk as a whole, I was thinking of this term of counter conditioning. Like we have to almost relearn how to be sometimes, and I feel like from generation to generation, you use the phrase generational curse. Like, yeah, it's a curse, but it's also in some ways a blessing, I guess, in a weird way. And I just want to give this example. So like if you've ever been like in a crowd of people and like, you know, somebody just start running and then like everybody's running and then like we don't stop to ask like why we running, we just run, right? Like we just do that, right? Like that's a thing with Black folk. But I feel like being hardwired that way, we have to kind of think about like how everybody's healing looks different. And that's why it's so important, I think, for people to go to therapy so you can get that individualized support. Because you know, intergenerational trauma and racism, like racism at its core, you know, it was calculated. That's why it's so diabolical. But in order to dismantle it, we have to understand like what it was actually designed to do, like what, and it worked, you know, full fledged, it worked perfectly, right? But when we look at racism today, I think one of the things we also have to consider is racism is like, it's like a disease, you know? It's like, you know, I know we have DSM-5 and stuff, but like last time I checked, like racism is not in there. Racial trauma is not even in there. But it's one of those things that we have to kind of really look at how it has been weaponized down through generations and how we have to kind of get in front of it and be like, nope, enough is enough. And that's where, you know, that hard action comes in, which is I got to take that chance and I got to go step in that office with that therapist, you know, or I got to go to that community event, or I got to go into a safe space like this, you know, to really recharge my batteries and understand what this thing is so I can really fight it and keep it from transferring from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next.
Heard. Definitely. Thank you.
I just want to add really quickly, you know, pointing back to Sam's point, when we choose to heal on purpose, which is very hard work, right? We not only prevent future wounds, but we also heal past ones. And so this actually heals our ancestry. It goes both ways. And so it's quite powerful to choose healing. Yes.
Thank you for bringing the ancestors into the space. Sorry to cut you off, Eva. Go ahead.
What Shashina just said brought to mind the NAT ministry. And, you know, this idea of rest as a radical act, particularly for Black people, and that for a people whose origins in this country was unpaid labor, for us to prioritize rest. And I talk about this with clients all the time, and clients who are like really high achieving and, you know, think that they should just sacrifice sleep to get more done, about how important rest is for their well-being, but also that is an act of resistance. And that just really investing in that time for yourself can be so transformational, and allows you to kind of sit with what you're feeling, which I think also just with this go, go, go kind of culture we have, that's also a way to avoid really understanding what we're feeling, and that some of that numbness we talked about at the beginning, that you're still struggling, but you might not be feeling the fullness of your reactions because you never stop to feel them.
Yes, absolutely. We need to rest. Rest can be political. As you were speaking, Eva, Audre Lorde's words came into my head. You know, self-care is self-preservation, and that is a act of political warfare, something like that. Y'all know what y'all know, it's somewhere over there. But yeah, I feel like that has been like a heavy theme throughout our whole conversation this evening. So thank you for bringing that up. So we have one last like big question to ask, and a few more minutes to discuss. So concerning trauma, Oprah's new book, What Happened to You, suggests that when treating trauma, we need to shift the focus from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. What are the implications of this shift for Black people?
I think, quite honestly, this gives us an opportunity to go back and name things that we've normalized as traumas so that we can take care of them as traumas instead of accepting them as like inherent character flaws of being Black, right? This is because we're Black. This is how it is. This is how we are. This is it. And it's like, no, this is a problem, right? I was having a conversation one other day. And again, just like normalizing my life experience. It's like, yeah, I just, I've gone through some things. I'm here now, but it's like, wow, like, yo, you kind of holding a lot there. And I think it's important when we can say what happened to you, we get to name like, yeah, this did happen to me and this did have impact. So let me create some space for that so that I can take care of it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I really like that reframing because it kind of externalizes the cause and the source. It's not what's wrong with you. It's, well, if we talk about what happened to you, we can probably understand that, any behaviors or any symptoms or experiences you've been having as a result are probably a very natural, pretty healthy human response to something traumatic that is not natural, that is inhumane. And I think that it can be so healthy to just say like, okay, this was me coping with something rather than believing, because I think when you believe what's wrong with you is the issue, I think then it's easy to think about experiences you've had that have been really negative or traumatic as also somehow having to do with you, and that somehow you're the root cause or you're the common denominator rather than these things happened to you. And of course you reacted in a way that made sense in that circumstance and isn't serving you now.
So I'm hearing it's destigmatizing. Yeah.
I guess I want to say, like, when I'm in session, like, I think language makes all the difference. So this shift in, what happened to you versus, what's wrong with you. I feel like it allows for us to take the trauma out of the person for a moment and sit it on the couch next to them and have a conversation about like what this thing was and what this thing is. Now, what we can't do is we can't change the immutable facts of the actual trauma, but what we can do is deal with it and take ownership of it in a way that allows for, acceptance, that allows for us to be able to, walk in our truth, and to also continue to realize that, I think of this phrase a lot because it makes almost all of my clients cry. And I say to them, I want you to say these words: I am worthy. I am worthy. And if they say it enough times, they start to cry because I want them to know, I want them to realize like, you are worthy. You are not the product, the sole product of this thing that happened to you. We like to try to separate ourselves or distance ourselves from it. But at the same time, like, we can't change the facts of what happened. But when we are able to sit with it and understand it, we have a better chance of working that out and working through it. So I'm worthy. Yeah.
Powerful words, a mantra that I think any of our attendees could probably use and benefit from when in times of need. So thank you for that. Any other thoughts from anybody? And it's okay if there are no more thoughts. Okay. So before I turn it over to the question and answer period, I just wanted to provide you all an opportunity to share any other excuse me, any other messages or resources that you want to give people concerning identifying with, coping with, or healing from racial trauma? Oh, I'll also take this moment to say, which I haven't mentioned, that, all of you attendees, everyone who registered, I believe you were sent an email earlier today with a resource, mental health resource list. And that list was compiled by our panelists. And it has books and articles and podcasts and emergency resources and ways to get in touch with a therapist, stuff like that. So that is out there for you. But if there's anything additional, panelists, yeah, feel free to share now.
I'm just thinking about there's something like, we all mentioned this like kind of on the side earlier about our ancestors. And I'm thinking about like what it means to really hold, what it means to really honor, like the folks that contributed to us getting here and how we ended up like where we are, became like in this position, in this place. And it's because like, it makes me think about like, because of them, we are, in addition to like, because we're all here in community together, we are. And so, I don't know, I'm just also like thinking about parable of the sower and like everything we touch, we change, and everything we change changes us. And so that feels really resonant for me right now in this moment, of how important this conversation is, how important continuing conversations like this are. A lot of like what I've been thinking about, like, I didn't comment on like Oprah's book and things like that, because you all like said it so beautifully, and just to sit back and really listen to everyone, like what we all have to offer. And also like reading in the chat as to what like folks are offering, who are witnesses. But it comes back to like value and how like a lot of our language that we've been using devalues us. And it teaches us to like devalue one another and also to devalue self. And it has been consistent generationally. And when we start to like really value one another, start to really value ourselves and value like the ancestors who brought us here today, then that is one of the places in which we can find our sources of power.
Yes.
I know that a lot of the resources that I contributed on the list, a lot of them are diasporic. So you might see some things from like curanderas and different like things like that. And it's about like communal healing and like coming together. When I think about trauma, I view it through the lens of soul loss. There was a piece of us that was lost because of an event that happened, and what are the ways in which we can recuperate that so that we can be whole again. And then once we fill in all those holes and spaces, then we're like able to glow. I think of it like a golden glow, but like really like step into our power in this way that allows us to really love and to be and exist without all the fear that we've been indoctrinated with. And so like, that's my final contribution, aside from whatever questions are asked that we're answering.
Thank you. I think that's a beautiful place to end. Of course, yes, we're still in the Q&A, but like really just emphasizing the importance of ancestral work, regardless of what your spiritual orientation is, I think as Black people is just like super essential. And over the last few years, it's something I've really started developing more and emphasizing, and now it feels so important to me. So yes, thank you for encouraging that and emphasizing that. And thank you to all of our panelists for just like giving such thoughtful, wise answers this evening. So now I'm really curious to hear what other folks want to hear about, what attendees are wondering about. So Nadia just logged on to kind of help me out with the Q&A. If you happen to have a question, feel free to throw it in the chat. I think that at this point, we can probably also make live comments if you'd like, or maybe you can't be unmuted, huh? So, okay, maybe we have to do it in the chat. But yeah,
we are able to bring people over into this portion. So if people would like to do that, we have that option.
amazing. I was hoping we could do that. Okay. So yeah, anyone who'd like to ask a question, go ahead.
I believe you can just raise your hand and we can use that as an indication to bring you over to the panelist side.
Hi, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate this. My question is like, what do you do when you have experienced racial trauma, but you've also experienced trauma in your own community, in your Black community? Sometimes, things happen in our families, things happen that, and it's like, where do you go? Like, what do you do? Thank you.
Can I take that question, Kim? Okay. I don't know your name, but I would say, one of the things that I think about is this analogy. I just see the initials WB. So WB, if your car engine light came on today or tomorrow, what would you do? You would take it to a repair shop. You would try to get it checked out. You would get a diagnostic run. You would try to figure out how much it costs, hopefully not too much, right? Get into the space, get into therapy. Is no shame in it. There is a lot of stigma around it. There's a lot of assumption around it. But if you get the right therapist and you get in the right space and you sit with that person that helps you to get in the right frame of mind so that you can deal with both the racial trauma and the family trauma. So, when we talk about trauma, it's different types as well. We got vicarious, we got, all kinds, right? Multi-systemic, multi-layered, all those different types of traumas, right? But we have to be able to, as the clinicians, we have to be able to drill down through all that to really figure out, okay, how do we get to that place of healing? How do we really get to that place of, self-actualization? So it's really important for you, WB, to get into that space, into therapy.
Just going to add really quickly, and that might create work, right? It might not be the first space you go into. It might not be the first therapist you work with. It might stretch you, and that's why being grounded in the choice, like I'm going to do this, even if it is hard, is important. And so, WB, we are breathing with you. Yeah, this is hard work. This is hard work.
All right, thank you. It looks like we have another hand raised.
Hello. Oh, hi. Hi, everyone. My name is Casey. Thank you so much for everything that you said. It's been so powerful and really just had a huge impact on me. My question is, a lot of times self-care for me consists of resting the body, but what are some best practices or ways to rest our minds in a world that feels so loud?
I can start. I'm sure we all have some response to this. Starting with that, resting your mind, right? They say there's 7 different types of rest. We have sleep, right, which is our biological need. So our organs can do what they need to do, our bodies keep going, but then there's also rest, which gives us an opportunity to step out of our body and our mind's, usual narrative. And so giving yourself sensory rest, taking breaks from screens, taking breaks from computers, taking breaks from your usual urban environment to be in nature, to bathe in nature, to ground, to feel the earth, to get fresh air. Resting from usual activities. Even if you're a creative, if you're constantly in that creative space, what does it look like to step out of that? What does it look like to seek inspiration as a way of resting from constantly being in that high functioning, I have to process, I have to plan, I have to get the things together. So I would say thinking about little ways to shift what is your day-to-day narrative gives you an opportunity to rest, or the way to start practicing rest. But like anything we want to be good at, we have to practice it. And so rest is something that we tend to have to practice because we don't know how to. We're socialized to go, 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 go. So even just naming, I need to rest, you're already interrupting that pattern of behavior. And you're starting to give yourself more of what you need, which is attuning yourself to rest, so that then hopefully you can start to take those steps to say, I'm going to take the day off, right? This is the second job I've had where they've had unlimited time off. And it's amazing how with unlimited time off, people take off less time, right? Giving ourselves permission to sit down. I won't say the rest of what I want to say, but to sit down, just sit down, right? That is powerful, so powerful. So yeah, that's my offering around rest.
What I'm thinking about too, the first thing that I thought of with regard to rest, when Casey, you asked your question, I thought about like sitting in silence, but then sometimes sitting in silence, our like thoughts are too loud. And so like sounds with no words. You might want to listen to like water flowing. You might want to listen to raindrops. Might want to listen to just like jazz music. I like to listen to that old jazz music, like the real old rugged stuff, you know? And it allows me just listening to sounds. I have like a bowl that I play sometimes, but listening to those sounds, it's sometimes, because I don't know about anybody else, but sometimes my brain feels like it's like just in knots, like it's wound up, kind of like if I'm having like muscle tension in my body, I'm like, how does this happen in my brain, right? And so I'll listen to something that has like a flow to it, or like puts air in between the spaces of this tightness here that allows it to like open up. I like to listen to like a group called Beautiful Chorus, which is just like so lovely and peaceful. And you can feel like the lightness in their voice to like uplift. And it's just, and so, yeah, so when I think about relaxing the mind, I come back to sound.
So thank you for those responses. I think we should move on only because there's a bunch of questions. We might not get to all of them, but I'm seeing some themes in some of the questions. So I'm going to throw out the theme that seems to be prominent right now. So we have a couple questions about future generations of raising kids. One person asks, how has racial trauma affected the way you will raise future generations and the way you view society? And then another person is asking, what do you recommend for parents and caregivers who have youth/children who have clearly been affected by racial trauma, especially from the past few years, but they are not interested in traditional therapy?
I'm a parent. I know a little something about parenting, not that much. I'm trying, I'm really trying. And just being from my own experience, I realized my hypervigilance around racial trauma, around racism, around systems of oppression, introduced things to my daughter before she was developmentally appropriate points, before she could fully understand the fullness of it. And so in recognizing that, I've taken a step back to be able to, as much as possible, explain things to her in a context that makes sense for her developmentally. And so in our effort to protect our children, I think we also need to protect them by recognizing they are not our age. And so they don't have the same life experiences to hold what we're holding. And so we're trying to protect them by filling them up with information, but they can't always hold all of that information. And so giving them bits and pieces as you can, I think, is one of the ways that we can hold them. And to those who don't want to go to traditional therapy, I get it. This goes back to my earlier point, like, do we have more communal spaces where young people can talk about their experiences without feeling like they have to be directed in any particular way. Yeah, being in our world is being reconfigured daily because of new occurrences, because of disease or illness. And so I don't know all of what those look like, those formations look like, but we have to create spaces for our young people. And as adults, we also have to step back and just sometimes just be quiet and give them space to do that. And then the last thing I'll just kind of say there is, you know, I like to say that a lot of the healing modalities that sometimes what we associate with healing modalities, we associate with whiteness or like new ageness. And I just want to say that not really, right? I like to encourage a return to old technology, right? In the spirit of Sankofa, go back and fetch it. We've been taking care of ourselves for a very long time. And so even if we weren't saying, hey, when we dance together and sing together, it helps us release endorphins so that we feel less pain, we knew what we needed to do when something happened. We knew how to hold each other. And so I think in our communication with our young people, reminding them that we've been taking care of ourselves. We've always had systems. We've always had ways of being. And even if there's new language around it, and even if we've repackaged it, and even if some of us had to go to school to pay for it, to get the understanding, we've been doing this for a long time. And so maybe try therapy. Maybe it's not like what you expect. Maybe try this practice. Maybe it's different for what you've assumed.
Yeah, thank you for that, Shashina. And I'm also thinking about, like, when it comes to children or our youth just in general, humanizing them. They're humans. They're having their own experience, their own emotions. And a lot of the time, as parents, or like my experience as a parent before I got to the point that I'm at now, and like the experience that I've had with my parents, is that they like to map over my experience with theirs. And adults tend to do this to youth, is like the adults, oh, I know better, or I only can see my view, or if only you knew and you could expand your world and open up your eyes. And so there's this like thing of adults mapping over their experience, mapping their experience over a child's experience without noticing that the child is having their own experience. They're a human, and their words and feelings and what's happening for them, it matters. And so when we approach them and we're talking to them about the different things that are happening in the world and the ways in which they need to, take care and be safe and like all of these things, we have to remember to hold that they're a child, like they're children, they're young. And so approaching them with compassion, love, understanding, openness is essential in moving them from a place of not knowing to knowing. And to do that gently, to do it tenderly, to really love them because they are children. And we know a lot of our experiences with our children is that they grow bigger than a lot of other children do. And so society views them as through an adult lens, even though they still have child brains because their bodies are bigger. Remember their age, remember developmentally where their mind is. They might have a body almost the same size as yours, but they're probably spinning around in circles talking about, look at me, and like really holding that and honoring that is so important when we're talking to them about these things, when we're thinking about healing.
Yes. That was phenomenal. I really appreciate that perspective. As someone who doesn't have kids, I really appreciate y'all kind of just like communicating the ways in which we can like pass this work on to the next generation and really, use these ideas to rear them in the right way. So thank you for that. I'm looking at the time, it's 7:30. Unfortunately, I think we're not going to get to the rest of the questions. But if you have a really burning question and you want to make sure that question is asked, like, please, you can put it in the chat real quick and I can try to compile them and see if we can get them answered later. But yes, thank you everyone for being so engaged and asking so many questions. And now at this point in the evening, I just want to thank all of our panelists for participating, for sharing their wisdom, for sharing their personal experiences. This was truly a transformational conversation for me. I admire each of you so much, and I feel like just being here helped make me a better clinician. So I'm sure that our audience members really appreciated hearing from you. Any final words any of you would like to say before we close out?
Just thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, same. I have so much gratitude. Thank you.
I echo that. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ashe. And thank you for joining us. Like it's been communicated in the chat, we have been recording this. So there will be a recording available online if you go to the Black Paradise Project website, or I think the Mural Arts website as well. Take a look in the chat if you want to find those specific websites. Thank you everybody so much. And I encourage you to please check out the other events and things going on at the Black Paradise Project. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.